and to conceptualize what is happening in your head. Because you can't just throw it into a SolidWorks program or run computational fluid dynamics or something like that. You have to do it in your mind. Well, what's up, people? So today, I thought I'd dig something out of the attic, my old 124 scale racing slot cars. Actually, I shouldn't say that old, because these are the ones that I would actually take racing and built more recently, not actually the vintage ones I have. But wanted to get them out, show you guys, and talk about why slot car racing from the 60s is actually insanely relevant to young people, engineers, car guys, insanely good fun, great racing, and really should be done more often. I think it'd be kind of fun. So let's dig in. Actually, even the box is kind of cool. It's a wooden box, handmade specifically for 24 scale slot car racing. And then I stained it and clear coated it and all, just to give it that old, old finish. Very similar to what a machinist might have, or old racing toolbox if you're going to put gears and whatnot in it. So the boxes slot car races always have are fun because they're personalized. It's really like your collection. It's your pits when you go to the track, and it's a lot of fun just to personalize it and have where you're going with it. You see, obviously, it's got a place for the different cars, and it's just so much fun. And it seems kind of almost like completely lost. Actually, this whole room, it feels like your grandparents' house. Like they have all kinds of old, weird, cool knickknacks that you don't understand and your parents aren't cool enough to have. So I guess I'm like the youngest grandfather ever, or like cool old uncle. So let's just go with it. Anyway, 124 scale slot car racing was super popular in the 1960s. It was kind of a fad. I think it lasted pretty good in its heyday for 5 years or so. There were giant commercial tracks, 8 lanes wide, might be 150 feet plus a lap. They were giant, and the cars were really fast. So obviously I had HO slot cars when I was a kid. I think we've all played with those. And right now today, 132nd scale cars, which are about this big, are very popular. And they're very beautifully detailed. They're on plastic tracks, and they've got magnets. I never liked HO slot cars or 132nd scale because of the magnets. You can't power slide them. You don't get to drift them. The racing's not as good. And in fact, the 32nd scale slot cars, I take all the magnets out and put in weights. So you drift them and slide them, and it's really good racing. Like what 24 scale slot car racing is. Because the big commercial tracks are actually made of wood, and they have copper braids. So there's no magnet. All the traction you get is actually from the tires. But I want to show you the vintage ones, kind of what got me started, and then we'll get into the brass ones and even the crazy wing cars with insane motors, because it's really relevant to engineering and building cars and racing cars now. It's also something that you can do on a very modest budget, restore cars, and in the case of vintage ones, you might even be able to restore if you can find them and make a little bit of money. But let's start here. So this one I found in an antique store when I was a kid in Tiffin, Ohio, and this was the most produced 124 scale slot cars in the 1960s. This is a manta ray. It was classified as a thingy because it's got a polycarbonate, durable shell that's vacuum formed. And as a thingy shape, it was kind of like the old hot rodding back then. You get into the George Barris cars and all the crazy thingies and Ed Roth and stuff. And that was from that era. But this has an aluminum chassis that is, actually, is it aluminum? I think it's aluminum. Stamped aluminum chassis. Has the big motor back then. Of course, motors got smaller, you'll see later. And this is a sidewinder, so it's in transverse. Better weight distribution back then rather than a longitudinal one. This one's got silicone tires, which is actually kind of neat because even though this thing is, gosh, how old is this now? Like 50 years old. The tires still have some traction to them. And the other fun thing about the old vintage cars like this, the guide flag, as it's called, and this is what would run in the slot right here, and it turns, and the cars can power slide through the corners, so you really have to throttle it. That's the guide flag. That's what goes in the slot. And then the braids here are what pick up the electrical contact for the motor, so you can control the voltage or give it reverse voltage for braking. But it's got this drop arm. So one fun trick, so if you get enough torque, they can actually wheelie as they go, which is really neat to see your slot car just kind of wheeling as it goes. And you can put a little rubber band on it or a spring just to give it a little extra push if you want to have fun wheeling. It might not be the fastest way to get around a course, but you can find a nice balance, and it's really cool to make your slot car hot rod wheelie, especially something you built. So there's a lot of fun with that, and it's kind of neat because toys like this that are frankly lost to history from the 1960s. I utilized 124 scale slot car racing with Genius Garage when I was developing a high school and younger program, because this is still the best way to teach racing dynamics, building, engineering, testing, sportsmanship, racing for STEM programs. And it's sort of funny nowadays, all these things that they're coming up with, these STEM programs and robotics and everything like that, when frankly, the best way to learn engineering, especially if you're into cars and racing, even aerodynamics, no joke, they're that fast, aerodynamics matters. Everything that goes into real cars and development racing goes into 124 scale slot cars back from the mid 1960s. So I think it's something really relevant and great. You don't get quite the same building and engineering in 132nd or HO, so if you can ever get into 24 scale racing, go for it. Find a hobby shop. There's not a whole lot out there. They're not real good about being on the internet, and most of them can't even break even, so it's a hobby for these guys. But for any young people or older people that want to get back into racing and building stuff, 124 scale slot car racing is awesome. So going from that, when I was a teenager and I had my first car, my Volkswagen Golf, I found some local raceways, and keep in mind the internet, this is kind of like pioneer days of the internet, and eBay was brand new. So it wasn't that easy to find stuff, but I made a vacuum form Bill Thomas Cheetah, and it uses a Parma. This is a steel chassis that's stamped, and doesn't have the wheelie ability anymore, has a narrow chassis, and the Sidewinder motor, the motor's got smaller in modern times, and the tires got super low profile and really wide. But had a Cheetah, because I was really into vintage cars and vintage racing, so it's something I made. Of course, the guide flag sticks out because it's not properly scaled there. But it was an early car of mine, kind of neat. And I had a buddy in college when I was at Ohio State. He was into vintage cars and vintage racing too. We actually took a trip to Road America together because Jim Hall brought all his chaparrals, hat, to Road America to see. So we had to see that. We drove my Volkswagen Scirocco at the time. But he and I raced at Tom Thumb Raceway, which is down in Columbus, Ohio. And if I'm not mistaken, is the oldest still functioning hobby shop with a 24 scale track in it, and they still race. In America, it's been there, I think, from the 60s. I mean, how cool is that? And they had a vintage race, and one was Can-Am, and you're allowed to have a vacuum form body, which is this, polycarbonate. You paint it from the inside because it's clear. And I can't remember if you could make a chassis for it, if you had to use an old one. But this one, you can't see so well, and I was in college. I was living in a dorm. I didn't have that great of tools. But this is a Cox, C-O-X, chassis. Is made of magnesium. Has the big Sidewinder motor, has the silicone tires, and silicone tires for the 60s are kind of neat because they don't dry out, they still work. But these are a little flat spotted from sitting for 50 years. It has the drop swing arm, and I just made a brass pan here. Kind of gets your center of gravity a little lower, screwed it onto the Cox magnesium chassis, and then screw the body to it in the side. It worked pretty well. I wasn't the fastest guy out there, but my car looked good. And it was pretty neat seeing it go down that big, I think it was a Blue King Special they had as the name of the track, about 150 foot a lap, 8 lanes wide, really cool. And it would wheelie a little, or it would find those undulations and those places where it would get light and hold it in there. So it looked really good. I was able to find a balance between showboating and wheeling and being relatively quick. So hey, if you're not going to win the race, at least get some style points, right? But that was really getting me into it back then, and it was fun because you get to build these things, and it makes you a better craftsman and engineer along the way. And the racing's really good and really tight, so it, develops that concentration and mentality for if you ever get to go real racing. So let's see, what else do I got in here that's old? Here's one of my old cars that I raced. I think this is a Champion chassis. It's stamped steel. You can just buy the chassis, and then you get the axles and the gears and everything and make it. And you can see the little motor in there. I'll have to kind of peel it back a little bit. You can see that there. Sort of an open can design. I can't even remember specifically what it's all called. This has adjustable timing on the not the commutator, for the head. Basically, you can change the timing of when where the magnetic fields come into place, higher time it. The thing will run hotter, but it ends up being faster. It's kind of fun what you can do there. Anyway, the tiny little wheels in the front, they either never touch the ground or just ever barely. And the chassis also flex and wiggle around and twist, and you have different durometers of tires and such. And see, all the engineering and interest that goes to a slot car like that is just the same of what a real race car is. So when you're adjusting your shocks, your dampening, your rebound, your compression, your spring rates, tire pressures, caster, camber, all that jazz, While that may not exactly directly translate, because these don't have shocks, the nature of how the chassis flex and wiggle around and the tires and the setup, it's all the same stuff. And that's why 124 scale slot car racing is such a valuable teaching aid and training tool, and heck of a lot of fun for any young person wanting to get in racing. It's better than simulators, and it's better than, gosh, just doing a robotics type thing. And it also doesn't break the bank, and any father, grandfather, mother, sister, aunt, uncle, you can all do it together as a family thing, so that's really neat. Again, this is a polycarbonate body, real flexible. You paint it from the inside because it starts out clear, and then the outside's real nice and abrasion and scuff resistant. You can see it's got some battle wounds from racing. The other thing you might notice, there's some residue from stickers here, right there on that. The reason being is on the big 8-lane tracks, each lane is a different color. Red, black, blue, green, orange, white, you name it. And during a race, a full race, you run a different heat in every single lane. And people will come out of the lane, they'll pop out, they'll crash, and you don't want to do that because time you're not in the lane, you're not going around the track going fast. So if you want to be a really good slot car racer, you can't crash, can't come out. But there's turn marshals, people around the track, and what you do is you get one of these stickers, and I think I have some more, but you know, it's just a dot of the color of the lane, and you put it on your car when you're running in that lane. So the turn marshal knows which one to stick you back in. And then of course it comes down to the human factor of how quickly they put you in. So it's pretty neat that way. That's an old car of mine. But a couple years ago, for Genius Garage, I wanted to do a slot car program for high school students and younger, and college students as well. So we got a big track. It was, I think, an Ogilvy hill climb. Really neat, about 100 foot a lap. And we set it up and put the race cars, stacked them up, got them out of the way, the big ones that is. And so what I did for the students, this is actually my wife's car she built, and this is the one I built. We started off with a kind of out-of-the-box stamped steel chassis like I did back in the day when I was younger. The motors nowadays, sort of a box stock one. It's sealed, sort of a kind of cheap motor, honestly. But they're really fast nowadays. And you get this out of the box. It already has the axles and the motor and the guide flag and all that, but it's up to you to set it up. How high is the guide flag? What is your ride height? How much rake do you have? Do you have the right ride heights to meet the rules, the right width? Where are your front wheels or tires riding? How much does it flex? Do you add little bits of weight to change the nature of where that is and how it slides, and your driving technique as well in setting it up? And then of course you got your polycarbonate body. I think I've got a clear one here to show you as an example. Now this isn't the same body, but this is one that just got trimmed, getting trimmed up to go on a chassis. This looks like a Lola Can-Am car. I think my buddy was starting to get it ready to stripe. So you mask it on the inside, whatever you need. He wanted to do some stripes, and he's masking off where the windshield would be, or the cockpit. And we didn't cut out the front wheels, we just mask them off, and you can see through. So it looks like a wheel well, but that's actually polycarbonate there, still the body, so it's good and impact resistant. And you paint it from the inside. That way the outside is still just the plastic and it doesn't get chipped up and scuffed, and it looks real nice and shiny. So this is what the bodies really are. They're super flexible and durable and very lightweight. You can see how lightweight that is. Of course, back in the day and in the 60s, the cars were not that lightweight. They were a lot thicker like this, of the polycarbonate when they came out. If you guys actually like this video, I'll dig out my actual vintage and antique slot cars. Some of those are actually made from a plastic model kit. Like Monogram, Revell, Cox were very popular back then. And if you wrecked them, you really trash them. So people took a lot of care building their car and then a lot of care racing their car, just like in real life. So, good lessons to be learned there. But these were the first ones we started off on. They were simpler and easier, getting the students ready to good craftsmanship, building something, setting it up, and then learning to drive them as well, because obviously racing is a big part. Oh, excuse me. Whew, it's dusty. Anyway, racing is important too, and that's also the case for any young engineers if you want to be involved with airplanes, or most especially cars. I know that the CEO of Honda's TRC, that's the biggest research testing facility in America, in Marysville, and he actually says the difficulty of young engineers today is they don't even know how to drive or drive stick shifts. So if you're going to be testing vehicle dynamics or something on actual real cars as an engineer, it's important for you to know how to drive well enough to get good data and repeat experiments. So, and the same holds true for slot car racing. So the students, if they haven't raced it, they need to learn how to drive. So starting with something like this is a great place. These are actually very fast, very competitive as well. Aerodynamics does matter. There's no magnetism for it. And the tires are sticky and all, and you got to keep them clean and change your durometers and everything. But aerodynamics comes into play hugely, even down to the point of how far forward or how far backward do you put your body on the chassis. Because if your center of pressure is approximately right here for the downforce of the spoiler in the rear, then that's going to change the way your car handles. And also you see the splitter here, it rides so low that it effectively scrapes. You don't want any air going underneath the back. So a young person really gets to learn a lot about aerodynamics and craftsmanship. And it's fun because this body was clear when I painted it. And I just wanted to give it something that really stuck out. So I masked it off laterally here, did the black stripes. And then I used the yellow and I just dusted it from the front, gave it a little bit of a fade. I'm not super into fades, but I think this looks pretty cool. And it stands out really good on a black track. So I was pretty proud of that. Here's one my wife did. So, you know, even women like to have fun with it too. And she was a good sport racing with the students and having a good time. Her favorite color is orange. So similar car there. And then there's another one there, of course. But getting beyond that, and those are the chassis that you can get, and you don't have to fabricate as much. It's also fun to build a car from scratch or getting into brass chassis. So now this one, I didn't make this one from scratch, but this was a kit for a brass chassis. So still the same polycarbonate body. And then you'll notice this is a very lightweight Ferrari 330 Le Mans car. And it's a brass chassis, starting to corrode a little bit from sitting in here. But this one's neat because you can see the piano wire bars here. And the design of this, there's a lot of flex. You can see all this going on. This is like the dampening of shocks in a real car. You can also see if I grab it up front in the twist, there's a lot of torsion here. And you can see the twisting of this spring steel and the piano wire, effectively. Now, for the rules of this class being kind of old school, like how people built cars in the 60s and 70s when they got fast with the brass, it's got an inline motor, longitudinal. Okay, so that was typical for that time period more. It didn't have the sidewinder or lateral one. Guide flag doesn't have the wheelie bar. They got faster then. And then this has actual foam tires up front that'll run a little bit. So it's a little more scale looking, really nice. And I really should polish this up. It's going to look terrible in a number of years. But there's something really beautiful and wonderful about making a brass chassis slot car. It's really, you're getting more into that craftsmanship, the building yourself. And the way you actually construct this, and you guys can probably see here, the piano wire with the brass, it's real nice to solder that together. So you'd have a really heavy-duty soldering iron, maybe even the type you'd use to do stained glass or like a Tiffany lamp building, and you solder them together. And at Genius Garage, we had, I got all the students different chassis jigs, which are these really neat, temperature-resistant flat bases that had little pins perfectly drilled in it, and you could put these pins to hold your axles and things perfectly perpendicular, and you can change your wheelbases and all that while you're making your own chassis. So that one was actually a kit. Let's see, do I have any scratch build ones here? This one's almost scratch build. You can buy the brass already sort of preformed this way and that. You can see this is stamped for a recess for your guide flag, which is neat. And then you cut out everything else and make it. But you can see this one's got quite a lot of torsion and twist. Real neat. This one I believe is is it a Manta? I'm trying to remember, Matra, something like that. Real rare, funky body I had. Painted it green, really enjoyed it. You can see through it. I didn't do an interior yet. This is just kind of a fun one I wanted to do. But it's neat because, you know, you get an inline motor in the same place it would be on the original car, and you can see it right through grass just like the original car. So that's kind of neat. So if you're not super rich and you can't collect or build full-scale vintage racing cars, you can have a lot of fun doing this, no matter what your budget is, or if you're able-bodied or want to stick yourself in an actual race car. But let's look at a scratch build one, because I did do one here. So this actually started off, I think it was supposed to be a Brabham or a Repco or some, actually V12 60s Formula One car. And I went a little silly. I remember the Honda back then. There was a stilt wing Honda, and I just thought that was kind of neat. Really wanted to take that too far, got kind of crafty. So this chassis, I bought it a couple preformed ones. You know, the side rails here and here where it was stamped for the guide flag. And then just design my own. You have the two main piano wires here, so you have some torsion. You can see that there, I think, the torsion, the flexing of the chassis. And then these two side rails so they can come up and down. I don't know if you can see this. Let me find something to point with. I got tools in here. All right, so you can see my little Allen wrench. If you look here, there is a brass tube soldered on to the actual chassis rail, and another one here. And then there's a piece of piano wire bent at a 90-degree angle that can pivot in this tube and go all the way over here, and then another one that goes there. And what's neat is, and I'm pretty sure I got two of the same ones up front, but basically this piece of brass here and weight on the side is soldered to the piano wire that goes over here to there. So actually, it allows them to sort of go up and down. I don't know if you see that. And the moment arm here, because it changes its radius. It doesn't go perfectly up and down. It's actually in a bit of an arc. But it's just a different way of making this work. And then when the car is traveling at speed on an imperfect track surface, just like a real car, the body and that brass is able to effectively dampen the up and down as it's going up and down like this. And that allows the tires to stay in better contact with the track as it's moving at speed. Of course, the wing here, I made this so there's a couple of tubes. I don't know if you can see it in the back here. You can see the wing struts going down to a couple of brass tubes I soldered right by where basically the axle goes through. It should be able to pull that right out of there. Watch me break my nice little toy I made, oh, it's not corroded. I'm gonna have to oil that, it's starting to rust a little. So I can ditch the high wing and then just go to that really cool, no aerodynamic Grand Prix cars from the 60s. If you watched my video from yesterday. You know, when they were actually dangerous and you don't wanna make a mistake. But neat time, real pure, real dangerous. But there's something romantic about doing something so on the edge and having to do everything perfectly. Even though this body is effectively no aerodynamics, it does have enough of a chisel front that there is a little bit of aero to it. Frankly, this wing doesn't do a whole lot. More so than any aerodynamic effect, it kind of puts the center of gravity a little higher. So, you know, that's another great lesson for young people when they're doing things like that. I'm gonna put a little of this bearing or bushing oil here on these so they don't rust in place. And then when I get my slot cars out in another 10 years, or whenever the next time I do it with Genius Garage, it's not all rusted together and then I have to make a whole new chassis. So another good thing, remember, take care of your stuff, pickle it. That's why everything from jet engines to old firearms are, you know, you gotta pickle them if you're gonna leave them like that. Same thing for all you museums out there with historic cars. Make sure your stuff isn't gonna just rot sitting there. I had heard that Jimmy Clark's Lotus 38 that won Indianapolis in '65, I think it's up at the Henry Ford Museum, I actually got a picture of it over there, had a magnesium oil pan, I think, on that Ford V8, and because it was methanol, or alcohol, as Indy was back then, the alcohol, when you're burning it, some goes past the rings and ends up in the oil, and then it goes down and corrodes the heck out of it. So I hear that engine turned to crap over years because they didn't pickle it properly, so to speak. Anyway, that's some there. The rest is sort of fun. Let's go to wing cars. So here, back when I used to race, this is what's called the wing car. This got popular. These run totally on aerodynamic effect. And you can see they create a tunnel. And that's pretty neat because as it's traveling, your air that's going in here effectively gets compressed, has nowhere to go because these giant wing fences. And then you have a spoiler here. And what's neat about the spoiler, if you can see this here, you get to bend it at a profile, even with this little wicker gurney flap, so it's active aerodynamics. The faster you go, it's pushing down more, and at slower speeds, when you need it to be more rake that, more camber, or more like inverted flaps, it'll have that. And what's neat is here in the front, if you bend it to be this a little at speed, it actually kind of comes out like this and gives you aerodynamic downforce in the front, as well as like scooping or channeling more air and compressing it for here. So the thing that's really exciting, depending on how thick these wings are and how bouncy they are, your chin spoiler and everything, you are literally tuning the aerodynamics of this. Now this is really a beginner one when people just decide to run wing bodies on a stamped steel chassis. So this is the kind of cheap, old, popular in the 90s, maybe early 2000s, Parma Flexi 2 chassis, steel. Very heavy, not typical for a wing car, but that's where everybody started because the thing that's neat is you can have a wing body, put that on there, Or on the same chassis, you know, the next day, you can change it and put yourself on your Can-Am body with no aerodynamics. Or maybe you put on a body like this, which is kind of a GTP body, and you can run different classes. So that's what's neat about slot car racing if you got a good track, good hobby store. So, you know, you get a chassis like this, this is like fresh out of the box. Then you got to set it up. Maybe some of the old guys there will be nice and teach you how to set it up and how to pin it there. And then there's different bodies that you can buy and make depending on your class. And see, this one just fits on there just like that, basically. Okay, and then you got the pins to hold on, clips, and you paint it. Or, you know, you're switching to a GTP for a different class. And of course, there's lots of different motors, and it gets into detail there. But just giving you guys some interesting food for thought and hopefully inspiring some young people out there to do it. But anyway, here's a wing car on a normal stamp chassis. Let me show you one that's pretty zoomy, pretty serious. Okay, so here's another wing body. Got a Boogie Bodies pre-painted one on there. Real nice, real light. But this, check this out. There is like zero weight to this chassis at all. This is a laser cut steel chassis. Was made to be this way. You can see the torsion and how much that matters to it. But this motor, and I hope you slot car guys will forgive me. I can't even remember what the heck it is at this point. But this is definitely, is that correct? No, I guess it's okay. You can see that this motor is actually soldered directly to the chassis. You're not using set screws and bolting in because that'd be imprecise. You want to solder it on to get an exactly correct gear mesh. Now this motor, this is high RPM, heavier draw, rare earth element magnets. You can see here on the armature, actually, you can see some holes drilled right there as it turns. Those are for balancing it at high speed. You take a little weight out of there. You got to set the air gaps just right, the timing of where the brush is hit. And, you know, it's got different bearings, I mean, it's just really neat what goes into the engineering of these little motors and the building them. And that's something that you as a builder and racer do. So there's so much to learn. Uses a typical guide flag, and the front wheels up here don't actually touch. They're just there for the rules. But this is almost not even a car anymore. This is effectively an airplane that just happens to get its tractive effort on the ground through mechanical grip, through these foam tires, these lightweight foam tires, magnesium wheels, very lightweight. Now this car with this motor carries a lot more current and draw, so you kind of have to have a specialized controller. We'll get to that. But very, very fast and has everything to do with aerodynamic grip. As some of you all have heard or know, they always talk about sometimes in motorsports history, you might have an aerodynamic car, Formula One car, Indy car, whatever, where, you know, your mechanical grip is only good to maybe 70 miles an hour through a corner. But with the aerodynamic grip, if you're doing, say, like 80 or 90 miles an hour plus, you can get through it with the aero grip on top of it. But sometimes there's that funny dip where mechanical grip starts to go away, but then your aero grip goes away. So you either need to go smoking fast through it and get it to stick aero, and this is kind of like a curve here, I don't know if this is making sense. You got to go smoking fast through it aero-wise or slower and get your mechanical grip, but there's that sort of danger zone where it doesn't work in the middle. It's my experience that that scenario is blown out of proportion with real cars, and aero cars are not really that hard to drive in real life. People just like to blow legends out of proportion. But with slot cars, those legends do exist. So you really have to trust the aerodynamics of your slot car and how you adjust all the wings and nature on it. So what's exciting about old school 124 scale slot car racing is it forces a young person or old person, when they're building this, engineering it, tuning it, and designing it, to always be an engineer and to conceptualize what is happening in your head. Because you can't just throw it into a SolidWorks program or run computational fluid dynamics or something like that. You have to do it in your mind. You know how they say like the SR-71 Blackware was designed with slide rulers on drafting boards and in people's minds? That's how it was done, okay? Amazing things can be done without computers. And the shame about nowadays for school, and I say nowadays basically from like the late 1980s all the way to now, schools always tried to promote, like, come to our school, pay us tuition, we have fancy new computers, yay, that's how you design things. To the point where they've driven that in everybody's mind so much to the modern day that people believe that you use a computer to design things. That's not true. People design things in their head. You use a computer to work it out better, more in detail, to do all that. The fact of the matter is, you and I, young people, everybody out there, you already have the best computer you're ever going to have right here. You just need to learn how to use it and learn how to engineer in your mind. And something like this helps you do that because you can't use a computer for it. And that's just really neat. And it's exciting. It's something you can wrap your hands around. You can feel, you can smell, you can race with other people, join, good camaraderie and everything here. And it's just a really great hobby, almost completely forgotten, but it still exists out there. And I really just want to give you guys all a little bit of inspiration. I hope you'll go look it up. I think it's really great. For you guys that do like computers and designing on computers, here's an example of a 1/24 scale chassis that was actually 3D printed. That's pretty neat, isn't it? In this one, you'd have a motor that would go inline, and actually you can see little holes here to use as set screws to bolt your motor in place. And there's a spot for your axle and your little bearings that go in there, and it has some countersunk Phillips head screws in there that are set screws to hold the piano iron. So you still get the flex here that we were talking about. Torsion, it's pretty darn stiff, so maybe it would need to be engineered differently. There's even a nice little place for your wires to go to your guide flag in your front. So here, it's a perfectly good example. So you might start off with a stamped steel chassis just like this out of the box, and this is great. That's really easy to modify and solder to and whatnot. But if you really get excited about designing things on a computer, maybe you'll start making chassis with a 3D printer. And look, fits right in there, just like that, to the GTP body. And it's pretty cool. Pretty durable. There's downsides to doing it like this. Of course, you're not going to solder things to it. I mean, you could melt it with a soldering iron, but it's not the same. And this may not be appropriate for rules. So just remember that. But you can have a lot of fun and without spending tons of money. So really great place to learn. But by no means is a 3D printed chassis like this, frankly, going to beat your infinite ability to tune things and build it quickly with piano wires and flexures and beautiful little pivot points and such. So even though a lot of young people out there that haven't had the opportunity to see this might think that a 3D chassis printed is the way to go, this might end up being a wretched pile of garbage that's impossible to tune, and you keep going back to the computer and printing, when any old timer out there will go and realize the capabilities of brass and steel and everything like that, solder something up in 1 hour and kick your butt, and it takes you 6 months to develop something and realize you're probably not as well off, okay? But still a lot of great things to design and learn that's going to help young people in their life in the future. And if you have the talent to be able to understand these, build them, design them in your mind, to think, to analyze, consider things like the dampening of a chassis, the torsion, the aerodynamic effect, and you're a good driver, a good slot car racer, that's going to make you an amazing racer and builder. But then if you also have the ability to design something on a computer, and when I say design something on a computer, I mean you're designing it in your head and you're using a computer to lay it out and build it, then you're just going to be a formidable person. And this is something a young kid can do, whether they're elementary school, middle school, high school. And believe it or not, something like this, if done intelligently and laid out, may help you get scholarships to go into engineering school. I've actually seen that happen with a young person who was super into radio control airplanes. I think he's down at the university, what is it, down in Dayton, right, Pat, or the university or whatnot? But I'm pretty sure he got a great scholarship. I know he got a great scholarship, I just can't remember the school, in engineering and aerospace engineering, because what he did with radio control airplanes. So think about that, you guys. And frankly, all the fun I had with slot car racing way back when with these cars is the secret, frankly, of how I was able to do things later, like build the world's only turbine-powered Batmobile, or build that recyclable car called the Omega car, or then be able to work on things like Indy cars. I'd never done that before. There's no directions. There's no school to go for that. But if you're a young person and you're already building and designing your own cars and racing them and developing them in scale, someday you can do it in real life too. So, and it's super fun. There's all kinds of bodies. Here was one pre-painted, a Ferrari 333 SP. There's a really neat Lola T70 Mark IIIB coupe here. That's really cool. Actually, here's one a student did in the past. This young man, he built his chassis from scratch and designing it and tuned that up. And it's got a GT40 body on it. That's kind of cool. And here's some just old scrapyard stuff of wing cars. Nice man at a hobby shop gave me to show students with and whatnot. And he scratch built that. I think that's just really cool. I'm throwing stuff all around here. And it's fun. It gets really fun. You get the little drivers you got to paint. You put them in there in your old Grand Prix car. That's pretty neat. And you got your toolbox here. You got to have good little scissors. You got the fiber tape. You know, you got gear pullers, cool little motors, right? And you get into motor building. You buy the magnets, you buy the cases, you buy the armatures. You got your little, Allen wrenches. It's just cool. I've had this tool since I was a teenager. It's a nice little Allen wrench for working on stuff, and you take pride in that. And you guys probably think I'm a geek right now, and I don't care. Say whatever you want. This stuff's cool. And it helped make me who I am to build all the things I've done. So if you've ever wondered how I did that, when you see stories on my YouTube or on VinWiki or whatnot, here's the secret, you guys. So there's no school for this, but there's a lot of cool old timers out there that like to teach you. You know, setup jigs. This is just like real life racing. You know, with NASCAR, when they were checking to make sure the bodies conform to the shape and all, you got a jig here to make sure that you're meeting width requirements and such on cars, and proper height on a setup block and all, your ride height. So it's really neat. It relates directly to real life racing, and it's a lot of fun to get into the craftsmanship of building. You know, you get your decals and stuff, and you make your cars or whatever. Here's a setup block. So when you're at the pits or whatnot, and you're setting up your chassis, you might put on something like this. And then that way you can start looking and seeing exactly what your ride height is, how it's sitting, are your tires touching, and you need to know with your braids and your guide flag here how high this sets to your ride height. And each track is different. Maybe the braids are set a little higher or lower in different tracks. So that's all part of the fun. And something that I think you guys should try out sometime. Of course, you got your tires. These are probably old and junk now. Let's see. Oh, no, they got some life. The natural ones are actually made with fish oil, so they kind of have a fishy smell, which you guys might think is gross, but I kind of like. It reminds me of the good old days of slot car racing. Hey, what do you want from me? I know you geeks out there think two-stroke oil smells good. I don't like it, but I do like the smell of slot car tires. Yes, welcome to Casey's Den. These are Thoughts with Casey, Fireside Chats. Let's huff slot car racing tires. Yeah, treated fish, it says. Look at that. And it tells you the size of the tires and all. But this is no different than real racing car tires, just smaller. So, gosh, guys, this is just such a fantastic way to learn craftsmanship and building. And even if your family or people don't know much about it, there's a lot of nice guys out there at slot car tracks that I bet you will teach us some things. And certainly great ways to do that on the internet. And there's traveling leagues, so if you get really good and you want to travel around the United States or even world, you get really amazing at wing bodies or whatnot, you can do that. As a last note, here's my kind of just all-around controller. It's pretty neat. You got 3 leads, actually, that when you switch lanes on the track, you clip them on. And then when you're going to race the next heat, you move over to the other lane and you clip it on. This one's just standard. I have no ability to adjust it. It's digital, which is pretty neat. And it does a good job of connecting with whatever motor I want. But the old type of controllers, which I don't have in here, actually have an ohm resistor. Depending on how many ohms and how much resistance, it works better for different kind of cars. So for instance, something like this, which is a sports car and has no rear aerodynamics and, you know, kind of a more modest motor, still fast, you want to have a controller where from 0 with no power, it comes into, it's slower, it's less power, and it's real gradual and smooth sweeping to your full throttle or full current. However, if you're running a wing body like this on an extreme difference, you need it to get right there to power now. So if this one is effectively 0% throttle and a nice smooth sweep all the way up to full throttle of 100, then this one, you might actually want it to crack right into 50% throttle or 60% throttle right off the line, because it's so fast and you're so close, like right there from full throttle to 70% throttle all the time. And then just like a light switch, you need that brake for just a second. And it's not just on or off. I mean, you have to be actually super smooth in driving it and throttling it. So these same techniques that a young person learns, this is no different than the gas pedal on a real race car. No different, okay? So learning about electronics and electrical engineering as it relates to a motor and a controller here, and all the driving techniques of actually being good at this and learning to drive your car and its grip and mechanical grip and aerodynamics and centers of pressures and centers of gravity, and then just frankly being a good sportsman and being able to concentrate and not get bothered or emotional when you're racing. These are all just such wonderful lessons and make slot car racing so exciting. Because, frankly, this isn't just model racing. This is real, actual car racing. It just happens to be 1/24 scale and in a track. And you may say, well, radio control's better because I get to steer. Okay, first of all, you're right about steering, but this is so vastly complex in a way that while you could start off with a car like this that's reasonably simple and get pretty good at it, to build something so precisely and be so good at it where it starts becoming a razor edge, where the difference between good and great is a 0.5%, from like 99.3% all the time to 99.8%, and getting that last 0.25% up to 100% perfect. That's where the magic lies. Just like real racing and just like real life. So I also like slot cars because getting into it and getting decent at it is a little bit easier point of entry and a lot less costly than radio control car racing. I think people that get into radio control car racing can get discouraged quickly because your talent level you have to, when you start as a beginner, slot car racing, you might be able to come in here and have to go way up here to be amazing, where radio control car racing, you got to come in up here and it's less of a way up and amazing. Plus, it's a lot more expensive to do radio control car racing too. So, you know, I hope you guys enjoyed this. At the very least, just maybe seeing something you haven't seen before. Maybe some of you who are into slot cars get inspired to do something new. Maybe you guys raced HO or 32nd scale stuff that you kind of just buy and race on a plastic track for fun. And hey, that's cool. I used to do that when I was a young person, and I still do that right now. But it's just such a wonderful hobby and such a wonderful way to give young people the opportunity to engineer and build and become craftsmen. And it's something that just about anybody can afford. And I'll give you one example. And I don't even remember the young man, his name, but the last time I was at a slot car track, brought mine, of course, and I had a plastic toolbox with a nice controller in it and one of these cars and a couple extra bodies that I gave to one of my students that day. He was part of the Genius Garage car racing program. I was just like, let's go slot car racing, it'll be fun. And in came an older gentleman, a grandfather with his son, and his son was, grandfather with his son, no, grandfather with his grandson. And the young man, I think he was maybe 15 or 16. And they came in, they were really interested, they're kind of quiet. They had just been in there first time. The grandfather remembers slot car racing from way back in the 60s. And they were real nice. And the track owner, they rented a couple of cars and were running, and I was being nice to him, and I thought about it. And I had that plastic toolbox and the car and everything in it. And they're worth a bit of money. I don't know. I think all that stuff in there is worth a couple $100 anyway. And then the time to put it together and set it up and all. But I went up to him afterward and I just talked to him casually and I said, you guys having fun? Do you think you'd do this again another time? Because, it's neat to get family people together, the grandfather, the grandson, and, you want to keep the hobby alive. And they were having a good time. And I found out, the grandson lives a little bit away, but he visits his grandfather a few times a year. And I said, okay, I'll make you guys a deal. No strings attached. When you come visit your grandfather, you guys will come to this slot car track, this hobby shop, say at least 2 or 3 times a year. You can have that box and everything in it. But that's the deal. You have to come here at least 2 or 3 times a year together and race. And they said, yeah, we could do that. And so I just gave them the slot car box and the slot car and the controller. And I hope they get to come race, and I hope they got to do that. Not because I told them to, but I enjoy the hobby. I like to see that go further, but I also think it's really neat. And hopefully that young man got to spend some quality time with his grandfather, and maybe they find a new hobby together. So that's what it's all about, and I think he'll be an even smarter guy in the future when he's working on cars. So this is my kind of current modern racing slot car box of Casey's little jeweled wonders pulled out of the shelf collecting dust. If you guys like this, let me know. I'll pull out my vintage ones, different scales. I might even go dig through and find old boxes of things from Casey's past if you want to see. But in the meantime, I hope you guys will like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.